Thank you all for coming this morning. Good morning. So the name of our topic is, just in case you're not in the right place, it's the Regen Ramp Up Scaling Effective Climate Action by Smallholders. So we're going to have now a half hour, 30 minutes, discussion amongst panelists, and then we'll have Q&A for 15 or so minutes afterwards. And just to quickly introduce our panelists, we have Rikin Gandhi to my right, who's CEO of Digital Green. We have Juan Mejia, who is strategy country director, Acceso Colombia, and this is his first time to New York City. So welcome, Juan. We have Claire Brosnihan, who's of the Global Partnerships team at Acre Fund Climate, Food Systems, and Gender Lead. And we have Debbie Din, who is founder Proximity Design. So let's start with the first question, folks. First, share with us, please, to Rob's point, which regen agriculture practices you are introducing or thinking or planning to introduce to the farmers you serve. Give us an example of one or two practices. So you want to start, Debbie? We don't have to go in line.
Sure.
Yeah,
we're actually started introducing ag biologicals and or microbial technologies, and that's another word for it. Basically, biopesticides, biofertilizers, biostimulants for soil health. And it's been about 4 years. And they really help farmers restore soil health and biodiversity. And so we've, and they've done really well because they're about a fifth of the cost per acre of chemical fertilizers. And we have about 189,000 farmers who have adopted or actually purchased these products.
Over how much? How long?
Over 4 years.
Wow.
So they've purchased these products, and especially since the price of fertilizer tripled, after the Ukraine crisis, then it was a real opening for us. So yeah, farmers are buying them and interested in them and seeing earthworms come back in their soils and doing better.
Excellent. Thank you. Claire, you want to go?
Yeah.
Sorry. At Acre Fund, we've had a lot of success working on crop diversification, crop rotation, intercropping, agroforestry, integrated pest management. So really pushing these messages out through our channels. That's both field officers, extension workers, and also things like radio. And then one of our biggest wins has been on agroforestry. So it's something that we started around 2012, and we've really pushed the accelerator. So we just celebrated 320 million trees planted this year cumulatively with smallholders. Those are 40 different varieties, and we're on track to meet our 1 billion trees goal by 2030. So really celebrating that accomplishment. And I think Rob mentioned before, we see agroforestry as one of these best win-win-win solutions for smallholders.
Maybe we just lose that one. And thanks, Juan.
Well, at Acceso, what we're doing is also related to bio inputs at some point. But we focus on what's the soil amendments, and that takes into account reducing chemical inputs without necessarily getting rid of them, but reducing, being smart about them. That's what we're doing across the three enterprises. So we operate in Haiti, El Salvador, and Colombia, just so you know. The other focus is integrated pest and disease control. And one important thing that we're doing is we're taking cultural practices very seriously. And some of them relate to using more precision agriculture from the cultural practices that also uses chemical inputs and also focuses on water efficiency. So just to mention some new ones that we're implementing.
Rikin?
Yeah, so we partner with a bunch of organizations, including Acre Fund, other ministries of agriculture, and use digital technologies like an AI bot to train farmers on improved practices. Some of the three that I would highlight: in Ethiopia, site-specific fertilizer recommendations vis-a-vis the conventional 100 kilos of urea recommendation that the government was promoting, along with intercropping of lentils, boosting grain yields by 38%. Second, working with cattle dairy farmers for feed ration balancing to boost milk yields while reducing methane emissions. And third, in India, direct seeded rice and water management to reduce nitrous oxide and methane emissions. And we're seeing that we can find win-win outcomes for farmers to increase productivity while also mitigating on the climate side.
Thanks, Rikin. For Root Capital, I'd say put another plug in for One Acre Fund's focus on agroforestry, where our strong focus is on perennial high-value fruiting tree crops like coffee, cocoa, mango, avocado, macadamia. And just to state what we all know, agroforestry is basically farming with trees to create an environment that mimics the natural forest habitat. And we talked about this last year, but just to remind ourselves, agroforestry farmers are much more resilient in the face of shocks like heat waves and excessive rain and droughts, and they're better protecting farmer yields, including trees on the land to mitigate landslides and so on. But also, apropos to, of course, this week, they emit far less carbon than non-agroforestry farmers. And we conducted a study with the Cool Farm tool that we worked with a lot in the Americas for over 300 agroforestry coffee farms. 60% of them were actually carbon negative, which means they're sequestering more carbon than they emit in a year. So that's an important, and maybe just lastly, before we get to the second question, just to say, there are a lot of leading climate solutions in agriculture that aren't new innovations at all. They're longstanding indigenous practices that folks might have abandoned or were encouraged to abandon with the advent of industrial agriculture. So how can we, in addition to all the new innovations, of which there are really many and exciting, how do we encourage and support smallholder farming communities to adopt and sustain the older solutions that have been used for a long time and might have again been abandoned? So next question, folks. What barriers are you seeing from an individual or group of farmers' point of view, which keeps them from adopting regenerative practices? And maybe do you have any ideas as to how to overcome those barriers? So Claire, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think if I can sort of summarize our main challenges on this, it's like, can we make sustainable practices better than the alternative? More profitable, less labor, the benefits, coming sooner. And that's how we sort of think about the challenges more broadly. I wanted to share a story about our work on integrated pest management in Rwanda. And for years, we kind of gave the scientifically sound recommendations using some of these cultural and biological methods to control pests before considering pesticide. And we saw some success with that. We're kind of giving these by-the-book recommendations, but we were not seeing the adoption we wanted. And recently, we had our human-centered design team do a ton of workshops with farmers in Rwanda and basically said, here's what we would like you to do. Why aren't you doing it? and how could we co-design a better process. So to give an example there, one of our recommendations was like, check your maize plants and go and physically pick off the eggs or larvae of fall armyworm. Sounds great. It's a scientifically sound thing to do to control pests. All of our farmers were like, yeah, we're not doing that because it is a ton of labor. And so we said, well, what would you do as a solution? And farmers said, well, if you apply ash or sand, you can reduce the time by a lot. It's just as fast as applying a really toxic pesticide to your field. And we basically did that with all of our IPM recommendations, really redesign them with farmers. And that's relaunching this year. And so I think we just have to think about how do we make these sustainable practices faster, better, more profitable, easier for farmers to adopt if we really want to see bigger adoption.
Anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, I would say, as the saying goes, progress happens at the speed of trust. And I think farmers who are making a switch to a different way of farming, I think of course they need the agronomy knowledge. That's really basic, just to have that. Why does this work and what's the science behind it? They want to know that. But I think we underestimate the community support that's needed when you're transitioning to a different way of farming, because they're bucking the system. They're going against the grain, and there's a lot of stigma, in the village or something. Why are you farming? Why are you doing all these crazy ways of farming? Or why are you doing? And so I think that's true with farmers in the U.S. who are also doing regen ag. They're saying that they just really were criticized, and they had to have thick skin because you're really doing things differently. And so I think that kind of support is really needed, along with the agronomy support.
I echo that people obviously fear the yield hit in converting to regen, but being able to share stories of farmers like themselves who've done it can be a source of inspiration. And then I'd also say that there can be other constraints, including finance or access even to inputs. And just a month or two ago, we brought a bunch of complementary partner organizations together, from Regen Organics to Precision Development to One Acre Fund, to visit some farmers in Nakuru County in Kenya, just to hear from a bottom-up perspective of what are the constraints that these farmers are facing, to be able to not just be inspired, but actually take action and execute the transition to regen.
You want to add anything, Juan?
I think we've seen across our three enterprises that land tenure is a main issue, and it's actually makes a lot of sense. You regenerate the soil and a crop that belongs to you or your family, but if you have informality in that way, if you don't have access to land that's not yours, then you don't commit to transform the way you do stuff. So we're seeing that in Haiti, for example, with the socio-political context that's happening right now, and some farmers being pushed to move and farm elsewhere. But also in Colombia and in El Salvador, people have to rent land in order to produce, and that's like a different connection with land. So you farm the land to make a produce, but it's not the same connection and cultural approach that other farmers that own land can relate to, and it would be easier to transition to regen for those farmers. So definitely land tenure is one of those. The other thing is we're not looking for, so one barrier is what are the right incentives? We're not seeing incentives as they were presented for, or still are, for organic production in regenerative agriculture. So our approach is to have like a multiplicity approach in which we connect funders and we connect buyers that are interested in regen, and that connection to the market creates enough drive and enough pull for a farmer to commit to transition. And if you also plug in the risking in terms of securing prices, securing potential yield losses with commercialization, then we're better off. And also, there was one barrier that our colleagues in Haiti mentioned for this panel, and it was the fact that some of the transition premiums and incentives you want to set up. So we operate an OBF project in Haiti, and we're paying farmers after verification of the implementation of Regen practices. And so when verification comes and you link the payment to those practices, then farmers are more lean towards implementing them. And also, but one thing is, soil health cannot be measured in a short period of time with many approaches. But there's one that we're looking into and we're trying to test and pilot, and it's like the ratio between fungi and bacteria, which proves exponential increases with very few changes and adjustments in the practices.
Thanks, Juan. Maybe just a quick couple of points that summarizes a lot of what's been said, which is for us, two key barriers to ramping up and sustaining massive adoption of Regen. And maybe they're just the most obvious insights into the obvious. One is higher upfront costs. Our friends at TechnoServe estimate that there's a 52% increase in farmer costs, mostly tied to labor, for Regen farming adoption in agroforestry coffee, but that they make that up over time through an increase in farm yields, and they ultimately had a 105% increase in farmer income. So that's kind of thing one. And then in terms of higher upfront cost, I think we also recognize that the status quo for most smallholder farmers is low investment, low yield practices. So it's not like you're talking about replacing expensive chemical fertilizers with like new innovations like biochar or biofertilizers. You're talking about introducing fertilizers or biofertilizers for the very first time. So I think it's, and we're doing field trials right now with Regen Organics, organic amendment provider in Kenya, precisely because we want to, and I think together with Cash members and so many of you, to instill a culture of soil improvement, understand what is the impact on soil health, on crop yield, on farmer incomes. And then the second one, which is near and dear, I think, to all of our hearts, especially Root Capital's, so much of what we do as a non-bank financial institution, is there's just a big disconnect between the costs, the timing of the costs and the returns. So it's 3 to 7 years to actually realize the ROI financially for a farmer. You have to have financing up front. So a big focus of ours and everybody is flexible, affordable, higher risk tolerant capital to invest specifically in the Regen practices that are required. So like recently for us, we've financed 500,000 disease-resistant coffee varietals in Uganda, resilience grants to test kind of the use case, farmer ROI, cash flows for biodigesters, solar dryers, and then I think in Peru and Nicaragua, 1,200 hectares of financing for soil amendments and organic fertilizers, et cetera. So really important, those two things. Let's go to the next question, which is, folks, what outcomes specifically are you observing, trying to measure, and how? So profitability, price premiums, better quality, healthier soil, et cetera. And let's go quickly through. What are those outcomes? Debbie, you want to start?
Yeah, definitely. I do think that farmers see right away their soils, especially with the microbial solutions, that their soils are much more pliable, and they actually reduce tilling do less tilling, and they do see earthworms, and that is an indicator. And their yields are increasing like 15% after
50, you said?
15
15%.
after one season. So it's pretty
Wow.
quick for, I think their soils were so depleted. And the main reason is because, they're saying, so many of our farmers are saying they keep spending more and more every year on chemical fertilizers, and they get less yields. And so they're not seeing any returns from from the investments. So they see that right away. And, farmers are also getting a premium price, which we were surprised at, because their crop quality, like a rice farmer, is actually, able to sell it for 50% more in price because it's seed grade. So, and I think the biggest thing is just the resilience over time. When there's, erratic flooding and drought, they see that they are getting more yields than their neighbors, who their soils are much more absorbent and have moisture.
Thanks, Debbie. Anybody else want to pick it up? Thanks, Claire.
I think the two major things we look at are like, is it evidence-based and is it economically viable for smallholder farmers in this context? So by evidence-based, we mean not only like in the scientific literature, we certainly review that, but we also weigh really heavily on participatory farmer trials and looking at the evidence coming from that. And then in terms of outcomes, we do look at soil health changes, so things like soil erosion rate, soil acidity, soil organic matter. Agrobiodiversity is an important one. Are we increasing that on the farm? Are they planting more trees? And also looking at the environmental, the social, and the economic. So looking at things like, are we actually reducing food insecurity? Are we improving dietary diversity? And so seeing kind of the full range of that. And then this year, we also took the step of, we've always measured these outcomes, but they've kind of been a little bit all over the place. Like, we measure soil, we measure food insecurity, and we recently took the step of adopting the Regen 10 outcomes framework and adapting that to our organization and sort of plotting our Regen roadmap through 2030 and actually giving concrete targets that we can measure our progress against. So that's sort of what we're using moving forward.
Thank you. At Acceso, what we're doing is, or observing is mainly practice adoption. And in practice adoption, we have interesting learnings about, when you have an OBF project and you have verification, then you're able to measure, and you go to the field and you take samples and you measure. So stuff like yield increase or yield behavior, it's actually more accurate when you go and measure by sampling than the self-reported information that we gathered through digital tools. So we're learning and adjusting that about collecting the data. The practices that all around are more implemented are integrated pest management with the cultural changes that we're implementing, and also traditional knowledge, which also relates to cultural approaches. We're seeing many new farmers that get into new crops, different to what their family have been producing before, and they were sort of disconnected between what's the real use of the fertilizers and what they need to apply to each tree, and the best management. And when we get there and we explain that you could be doing something manually, like weeding and getting rid of organic material in the inner circle of the roots, and then you can replace the pesticide, or you can replace the weeding chemical with that labor. It's actually reconnecting with doing something for helping the plant feed itself. And there's like a mind-blowing connection with farmers there. And also, what's on the pipeline to measure? Soil, carbon, as I was mentioning, bacteria and fungi ratios in plantain specifically in Colombia. But this is done also for El Salvador.
Thanks, Juan. Rikin, you want to add anything?
I was going to just say that for certain types of value chains, like for example, for dairy farmers, you can see a quicker kind of change in some cases than obviously some of the longer duration cycles that agroforestry or cropping system changes obviously entail. We see, like, for example, in Ethiopia, in the southern region, where moving from the traditional just grazing of animals, that just giving these more specific for your location, the fodder availability for your age and breed of animal, that these farmers are able to see increases from like a liter per milk per cow in a week from 2 to 3 liters of milk per cow. So it's actually optimizing the diet, which produces greater return for the farmer while reducing their methane emissions. And yeah, echo like the fact of these metrics like of income, productivity, and such, but also like one of the new kind of metrics that we're also adding as a North Star for ourselves is how can we increase the agency of these small-scale producers themselves to choose what is most important for them. We're in this whole extension kind of business, and sometimes extension can be very top-down, that we're trying to tell people do X and Y. But from our point of view, we wish for these farmers to become less dependent upon us and ultimately just better decision makers on their own right, no matter what they end up choosing to farm. And so that's become a new metric for us to try to track.
Can I just
Go ahead,
mention
Debbie,
one
yeah.
thing?
Please.
Yeah, there's also an external incentive, and this happened in Myanmar just 2 weeks ago. They turned back at the border 10,000 metric tons of mung beans, so affecting thousands of mung bean growers because they had high levels of toxic chemicals, pesticides in them. And so that is a real external incentive, to say, hey, here's an alternative to using those toxic pesticides.
I think I'm not going to weigh in on this one. In the interest of time, I want to get to Q&A. And the next question, I think, ties into some of these incentives that were just discussed. So next question is, how is your organization pivoting specifically, and what stage is your organization at in your journey towards scaling regenerative practices? And are you optimistic that you can scale adoption by farmers? So, Willy, why don't you start? Okay. I'd say we are at Root Capital optimistic but very clear-eyed about the challenges ahead. And so we've definitely seen a lot of commitment from smallholder farmers to climate solutions in agriculture like agroforestry. But what we haven't seen is matching, for instance, commitment through the supply chain to incentivize that adoption. Nor have we seen kind of more support from broader agricultural ecosystems. And so what is encouraging, I would say, in particular for us, working a lot with off-takers in global value chains, is in recent years pretty significant commitments by corporates to regenerative agriculture, and also kind of developments in, call it regen sector infrastructure like regenerative certifications that hopefully will lead to price premiums through the supply chain itself, which is kind of the point that you were making, which I think is super important. Having said all that, maybe the obvious thing to highlight is that the regen financing gap is massive and getting bigger because farmers are facing unprecedented challenges around market volatility and climate change itself. And so for us, our big focus in terms of the regen pivot transition is one, and I think this is one of the most important things about the Cash Coalition, is deeply listening to farmers about what are their priorities and what do they see as their regen future, what does that look like? And then secondly, I mentioned it earlier, is deepening support for farming communities in the regen transition. So again, flexible, affordable, high-risk tolerant capital. We're launching as part of a new strategic plan this fall what we call Root Ventures, which will be a specialized risk-buffered, if you will, venture debt facility to finance much more ambitiously those regen practices around resilient soils, resilient crops / agroforestry systems, resilient infrastructure at the farmer, at the enterprise level, but not overburdening the farmers or the businesses with risk where they really have very little financial headroom, if you will, to take on a lot of new debt or financing. So anyway, let me put that question out to the others, and then we're going to get to the last question, which is, why does Cash Coalition matter to you? Claire, you're smiling, you jump in.
Thanks, Willy. Yeah, how are we pivoting? Norman Borlaug has this quote that's "Take it to the farmer." And no offense to Norman Borlaug, but I think that doesn't go far enough. And a pivot that we're learning and a lesson we keep learning over and over and over again is you got to build it with the farmer. And unless we do that, it just doesn't take us far enough in changing farmers to a lot of these more sustainable practices. So this past year, we've really invested a lot in our human-centered design team and are kind of going through all of these different practices and recommendations to really explore further, like, great, this is, the by the book recommendation. How do we make that work for farmers in this specific geography? How do we make it faster, easier for them to adopt, easier for them to understand, all of those things. So that's a really big lesson that we just keep relearning and investing in further. I think similarly, Willy, we're really kind of clear-eyed about the challenges. That flexible climate financing is a major gap. A lot of these practices do have an upfront cost, and then the benefits come later. I think there's other practices that we're still trying to figure out how to make them work for smallholder farmers. So one example I give is we've been trialing no-till practices in Rwanda since 2017. When we have kind of a controlled station trial, we see yields being equal. When we move that to the farmer level, we see yields going down for no-till compared to conventional till. And so we're continuing having to pivot, the agronomic recommendations. We've started direct seeding trials to see if that could reduce the labor costs and make it easier. And so repivoting, reconfiguring our trials and continuously trying to figure out how do we really make this easy for farmers is another pivot we're making.
Thanks, Claire. Juan?
So we're in the middle of scouting for farmers that would like to jump into our pilots and our tests for Regen. And it's too early to say, but perhaps 1 out of 8 farmers that we encounter would be willing to bet on a new trend. And I'm going to use that word trend with care. I'm a big advocate of...
Go ahead. We have a gremlin in the system.
You're playing? It's I'm gonna call it trend with no evil in what I mean, but it's so farmers we are risking that this is another trend that we want to push to them, and so I think farmers that commit to transition have a deep connection with what they do and their work, their livelihood, but it's not easy to find them. So how are we doing this? With just creating the right incentives, with something that's important, that is to have some underlying model. At Acceso, we connect farmers to formal markets and we push to increase their income, and that's our drive. That's the model we present. And then the other stuff comes and gets plugged in the model for them. And I think that's really important to consider.
Great. Debbie and then Rikin, if you all want to jump in.
Yeah, we started pivoting 4 or 5 years ago as an organization and just purely focusing on co-designing with farmers products that are regen ag. And, honestly, we've been really surprised at the demand, and then farmers that really pay for these products and want them, and they get it that their soils are completely depleted. They don't know what's happening, and with all the climate change events, so they're under a lot of pressure, looking to reduce costs at any point. And so I think, we've been surprised at the remarkable demand and interest farmers have, and that has really, I think, energized us as an organization in our pivot, and just staying close to farmers all the time, and being very, very flexible every year with what's happening on the ground.
Rikin?
I'd say lots of challenges. I think the heterogeneity of these farmers, soil, hydrology, farming practice, sociocultural, is only increasing. And at the same time, the number of farmers is even increasing. Pre-COVID, India had 200 million small farmers. Now it's 260 million farmers. And there's a need to be able to meet that increasing diversity and scale of farmers. And I think it's a combo of trying to use some of these new tech tools like AI to be able to be more personalized to the farmers, as well as being able to listen to these voices of the farmers themselves who are innovators in their own right, to share practices. Like we have examples in Bihar, instead of burning the stubble of their rice crop during monsoon, they just trample it and then grow potato on top of that trampled rice straw. And that increases yield, decreases labor costs for them, it doesn't result in burning. These are the kind of innovations that the farmers are often having that we need to be able to surface into the corpus of some of these tech tools to be able to scale them more widely.
Thanks, Rikin. I think we're gonna segue into question and answer now, but with a last question, which I think is on everybody's minds. So the last question is, how is being part of Cash Coalition helping you as an organization in this journey? And so maybe if I could ask Lizzie T, who's up front, is the climate lead in our work at Root Capital, to answer that. And then we'll go quickly down the line, but this really is in the Q&A section because everybody wants to know that.
Great, thanks, Willy, and good morning, everyone. I think for me, it builds exactly on what Rikin just said. Context is so important in regen ag, and we're all trying to scale as quickly as we can. So I think being with the Cash Coalition has helped, at least through capital, learn faster about what works, what types of questions we need to be asking, so that we can collectively tackle this global challenge across our different contexts. So that's been really critical for us, and so that we're all kind of building the evidence base together so that we can have more evidence to bring to market, to bring to farmers, start to do more pattern recognition as we're all working in our different markets. So appreciate that partnership.
Thanks, Lizzie. Let's just go on again.
Yeah, I think there's so much to learn from all the Cash Coalition members, both what they're piloting as well as what they're scaling, that can really inform the kind of tools that we're developing. There's so much service complementarity in terms of the finance, access to inputs, downstream offtake and processing kind of relationships that so many Cash Coalition members have that can translate information into action and value. And I think the problem is so large that it just requires us to come together as a community.
So visibility, definitely, and collective learning. For me, one big takeaway this year out of the strategic planning sessions that we had thinking about the future of Cash Coalition was, what's the definition of regenerative agriculture? And we all had our intuitions and our knowledge that we brought in. And at the end, what actually emerged was what's important for smallholder farmers out of all of this. And looking at these topics with the lens of smallholder farmers from the perspective of the global south that we all bring to the table, I think that's very rich.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with what everyone has said so far. I would say being able to advocate for smallholder farmers in so many different platforms and with one voice is super powerful. Smallholder farmers are the most climate vulnerable population on the planet because they depend fully on the topsoil and the weather for their entire livelihood. And they represent millions of people. And I think it's a really powerful thing that all of our organizations, which do represent millions of smallholder farmers collectively on different continents, that we can come together and advocate for smallholder farmers with one voice.
Yeah, I agree with all of those. But I would use Willy's term, also the benefit of benevolent industrial espionage. And basically being able to figure out, learn from each other and what's working.
Awesome. So let's now go to Q&A. I think it's a small enough room where we don't need to pass the mic around. So over to you all. Yes.
I need to have a deeper voice so I can project. All right. My question is about gender integration in the work that you're doing. So given that women are more likely to experience land tenure insecurity, which you noted was really important to uptake of these practices, and also that they have differential access to information and to inputs, can you talk a little bit about the approaches that your organizations are to ensure that women can equitably benefit and participate in your work?
I'll start quickly, just high level. Root Capital is 13 years to what we call our Women in Agriculture initiative, which is about investing in, partnering with women-led and highly gender-inclusive businesses. So that's already kind of a mainstream thing that we do across all of our work. 1/3 of our clients on the lending side are actually led now. And so when we move into the regenerative transition, it's a lot of our curriculum on capacity building, for instance, would be heavily weighted around how we've adjusted that curriculum with Value for Women, which is a gender research organization we work with over a decade. So I think that's an important aspect of it. But let me leave it there. Others want to jump in on this one? Claire?
I can go. Yeah, I would say One Acre Fund's kind of program has been designed to include those who have been excluded from formal financial systems and extension channels from the beginning. But we're actually sort of moving from that by default mode to actually becoming way more gender sensitive over the past year. We actually have our new gender strategy launching next month. And as a part of that, we've done really extensive gender assessments in every single country, looking at every part of our program and saying, how do we really redesign this for the needs of women? We've worked with external consultants. We have a new global gender lead. We've recently hired 5 new gender and youth people. We've also been more rigorous about how we actually measure outcomes. So 2 years ago, we started actually looking at the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index to say, to move from, yes, we consider women in our programming, to actually say, well, let's look at the outcomes. Let's look at how we're empowering women and improving their agency. And then one last thing I'll shout out is, speaking of the value that we get from the Cash Coalition, One Acre Fund actually has a partnership with one of the other Cash Coalition members, Landesa, where we're really partnering on women's access to land rights, and then also equitable access to resources, because we really see the two working in tandem. So huge value that we're getting from that partnership as well.
And any other questions? Yeah, in the back. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thank you for the panel. It was very interesting, and I really appreciated the way you asked the questions and all the outcomes you were mentioning. I have a question regarding the enrollment strategy that you guys have and the learnings you've had from convincing and pitching to smallholder farmers, either to join one of your programs or to transition to those practices. What have been the learnings that you could share to us about what works and what doesn't in pitching regenerative agriculture to smallholder farmers?
Debbie. Enrollment,
We
pitching
have,
farmers, yeah.
We have different channels to meet farmers, and when we're introducing a new practice or a product, Regen Ag, it takes a lot of trust, and so face-to-face. So that's our most expensive channel. It's just going to villages, having crop advisors, sales reps down there, really talking to farmers. And our brand has been around for 20 years, so they do know it, but it's really developing that trust and that face-to-face relationship. And also showing sharing the stories of farmers, in their neighboring areas who have switched and their experience. So we have small video clips to show them of their other farmers and farmers talking to farmers, telling them the benefits. So that's an introducing a new practice that really helps. And then later we have other agro dealer networks who are part of our network who carry our products. And later when they get used to the product, then they can then go to the dealers. And we have our digital channels that are also pushing and supporting the messages.
Juan?
Yeah, I can add one. So Scouting for farmers is a common activity we do at Acceso. So our technicians summon the farmers and introduce the model, introduce the plans, and all of the different services that farmers can get by working with us. And there's something we are learning about getting to know the audience and then identifying champions, farmers champions that can connect with you, and they are going to be the champions where you're going to test stuff like the composting, the bio factories, for inputs, and also using like the snowball effect after those initial meetings. So you definitely need the local champion.
Maybe I'll answer this question based on a cash coalition lens, and then we'll take one more question because we're running out of time. Apologies for that. So I think what is so important about a cash coalition is that all of the organizations represented represent first mile, if you will, farmer networks that can reach and influence and accompany millions of farmers effectively, efficiently, at scale, year in and year out, with the service bundle that's required for, say, the Regen transition. So to be able to leverage however you're doing it specifically, big picture, the proximity, the relationship equity, the social capital that exists between first mile farmer networks. In our case, it's agri-SMEs. Different examples, I think, is so powerful, and being able to be that bridge is critical. One more question right here in the middle. Yes, you. Thank you.
Hi. Hi, I'm Joella Nicholson, and I work at the intersection of how do you integrate all types of SMEs into value chains, but really looking at financing. So talking about climate financing, love to hear about the new debt, venture debt fund. When you think about bringing on that capital that everyone is looking for to support this work, what are some of the barriers that you're finding in kind of mobilizing those capital providers amongst kind of a sea of so many needs? And then especially, I think this week and even outside that, but I know you're already working in AI and it's great for the farmers, but so much is going towards maybe things that aren't directed, and that's where the hype is. So how are you breaking through and to those funders, and what are those barriers that you have so that we can start thinking about how do we change that mindset of people who, can kind of support with their capital?
Great question. Who wants to pick up on that? Liz, you want to jump in? Just to put you on the spot.
Sure. So I think one of the barriers, like really zooming out within the smallholder space that we see, is that within the climate finance sector, obviously we're all feeling so much urgency to place capital quickly. And so I think you see actually quite large chunks of capital looking for opportunities. And in the smallholder space, often the ticket size that you're looking at is quite small. Certainly of microfinance, but even actually the agri-SME space, the ticket size for climate investments we've seen is smaller than other investments we're making in agribusiness growth, for example. And the risk is a little bit unknown, right? So like we've been talking a lot about how we're all trying to collectively build business case, and some of that is understanding more of the risk factors and how much risk is actually driven by the regen practice versus the kind of background risk of working in emerging markets. So I think that big disconnect has been one of the challenges that we faced. I think, again, where we see a lot of opportunities is Root Capital in particular is working through agri-SMEs, as Willy was saying, as really these aggregators, these local change agents who I think do have enormous potential to put climate finance to work for local communities. And in particular, we've really been working with some of the farmer cooperatives that we work with, or processors who have savings and credit cooperatives, to get that smaller ticket size capital in local currency to farmers for the very specific investments they need that year in improved fertilizer or small scale irrigation, which is a new collaboration that we have with Kickstart, who's in the room, which we're very excited about. So we're excited about that model and seeing certainly interest from funders who understand like both the impact, they want the impact as well as the the financing.
Rikin, you want to go, and then Claire?
I was just going to say that I think that there's fragmentation, right? That is obviously a barrier for some of those who might be looking to make bigger climate financing deals. So Cash Coalition coming together of this large farmer network, as Willy said, kind of provides that kind of opportunity. Second is there's a lot of like inconsistent kind of methodologies with regard to how to do measurement, reporting, and verification against climate finance. And that's also an area that Cash Coalition is working on. And where some of these new tools, remote sensing, AI, married with the boots on the ground that many of the organizations in Cash Coalition represent, can come together on. Right?
Yeah, I think all of the organizations here on the Cash Coalition are with smallholder farmers for the long term. And we need our funders to do the same. And so really those longer term loans and grants that are highly flexible allow us all to do the work that we do. You know, whether there's a drought, a flood, you know, our smallholders are facing so many shocks right now, as are our organizations, and we have to deal with that financially. So really flexible climate finance helps us do what we do. I think also taking a look at like blended finance, so looking at both grants and concessionary loans. Speaking for One Acre Fund, about 72% of our total costs are covered by farmer repayments. And sometimes we have, you know, funders say, well, why aren't you fully financially sustainable, or have that be 100%? But then we wouldn't be able to serve, you know, really the poorest of the poor, and we wouldn't be able to fund things like R&D. You know, we have a partnership with Digital Green, using their app for our call center operators. That may not have an immediate return. It's something that we want to trial and build, and we need that flexible grant financing in order to do that. So I think really an understanding of the flexibility, the long-term nature, and we're all in it with smallholders for the long term.
Thank you all so much for coming this morning. We are really grateful for your time. We're also grateful to folks who have supported Cash Coalition, Root Capital too. It is not easy to build coalitions. It's not necessarily like the day job as leadership of organizations. Pathological collaboration is incredibly important, and we believe deeply in what we're doing together, and we're really grateful, given all the noise and so many other things going on, for you guys taking the time to come. We also want to thank BDO one more time for their generosity. They made this available last year, and they did it again. Thank you so much. And please, if you've got time to hang out, but thanks again for coming.